The X-Men send Wolverine back in time in a desperate effort to change history and prevent an event that results in doom for both humans and mutants. This is my review of X-Men Days of Future Past. There were many people that were both excited and worried for this X-Men. The reason people were excited was because Bryan Singer was coming back, and Bryan Singer directed the first two X-Men movies, which were really good X-Men movies, like top-notch superhero movies. And Bryan Singer understood the X-Men universe, and he had a plan of like where the X-Men were going. But sadly that was screwed up in X-Men 3, and from there on it got convoluted and everything. And there were some people that were worried about this X-Men because people were saying that there were too many characters and that Bryan Singer has been away from like the superhero genre for a long time, and people were worried because his last movie, Jack the Giant Slayer, wasn't that good. But I was confident in Bryan Singer, and I had this movie at number 2 in my top 15 most anticipated movies of this year. And after seeing it with my dad, I have to tell you guys that in my opinion, X-Men Days of Future Past is awesome, and in my opinion, it is so far the best movie of the year. The good points. So like I said, I thought this movie was awesome, and the reason it was awesome was because pretty much every aspect of this movie was excellent. So like I said, Bryan Singer directed this movie, and he did such a great job directing this movie. Like, he captured the dramatic moments of this movie very well, and he directed the action scenes very well too. And in my opinion, he directed one of the best superhero scenes in a superhero movie ever in this movie, and that scene would be with Quicksilver. And when you go and see this movie, you'll know why a lot of people are saying that this may be one of the best scenes in any superhero movie ever. I also liked how Bryan knew he had to put a lot of drama scenes in this movie, but he had to put the right amount of comedy, like comic relief in this movie, just to balance it out. The next thing I was really impressed by was the writing. I mean, geez, guys, the writing was terrific. I mean, the storytelling was off the charts for a superhero movie. I mean, there's some people that are comparing this to like The Dark Knight, and I think it deserves to be compared to The Dark Knight. I mean, like, storytelling-wise. Because you know how in time-traveling movies the story can get convoluted and you can get lost and everything? Well, in this movie, it does a great job of going from the past to the future, where it's like, it makes sense, like, how it's being done, and it feels right. I also thought that the dialogue of this movie was written well, and the character development was written well, especially with Professor X and Mystique. Because very early on, you see how Professor X is this drug addict, and that's not like a major spoiler or anything, because you get to know that very early on in the movie. And you see how he gets away from that and how he rises above his addiction. And the thing about Mystique is that she has already had character development in the time that we haven't seen her, because the last movie, like the last scene took place in 1963, and the movie starts in like 1973, I believe. So that's a 10-year period, and during those 10 years, she has transformed from her sort of shy character in the last movie into like the badass Mystique that we knew from the X-Men movies, like the first 3. And you can tell by the way that she thinks in this movie that this is Mystique before she became a cold-blooded killer. And the last thing I'll say about the writing is that the characters were both used and placed well in this movie. I thought that all the characters had the right amount of time to be in this movie, especially the cameos. Like, even with like the cameos, and the cameos are awesome in this movie as well. But like the smaller characters that only had 5 minutes of screen time, I thought they were used well, and I thought that the way their powers were used in this movie were really awesome, especially with the team up powers with the mutants. And the acting was just top notch by the cast. And I thought the person that did the best job out of the cast was James McAvoy. And the reason I thought that he did the best job out of the cast was because of Professor X's character development in the movie and where like he began in the movie and where he ended up in like the final scenes. You may notice in like a lot of my reviews I talk about the editing and pacing of a movie, and you know, in my opinion, editing and pacing is a important part of a movie because it keeps with the tone that you're trying to go for in a movie. And well, I have to say, the editing and pacing in this movie was just terrific. I mean, God, man, everything about this movie was good, but like the editing and pacing were so good because, especially during scenes where it's like cutting from the past to the future, especially during the end, like during the final battle, because each scene felt like it had a purpose and it wasn't there just for being filler. And I thought the editor did a good job of the amount of time that each scene had and where he put the cuts in this movie. I thought the action scenes were really good because of the way they were being directed by Bryan Singer, but I thought the scenes that had mystique were the best because of the choreography that was in them. The visual effects of this movie were fantastic as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they got nominated at the Oscars, but man, the visual effects, I mean, there were just very few instances when the visual effects were like, that could have been done a little bit better there. But I mean, overall, I mean, Jesus, man, I mean, the visual effects were mind-blowing. I mean, especially with the Quicksilver scene. And I'll get to the Quicksilver scene during the spoiler section of this review. But man, the visual effects were ugh. The score of this movie was great as well because it went with many moments of this movie and it elevated like the suspense of some of these moments and it elevated the action of some of these moments in the movie. And the drama as well, because when that music played in the background, you like felt the scene. The designs of the Sentinels, which were the robots which hunt down the mutants in this movie, I thought the designs of the Sentinels were really good, especially because yeah, like the 1970s look was good, and it seemed like that they could be evolved like after like different versions into like this menacing, like scary looking type of Sentinel that is in the future. The final good thing I'll say is the ending, because like after the last moment of the last scene, it was like, wait a second, what? But I'll get to that moment in the spoiler section of this review. Are there any bad points about Days of Future Past? Really, there are only nitpicky things. I mean, there are just like one or two nitpicky things for me because of continuity issues. But like Bryan Singer like didn't think about continuity issues because he's like, just screw it. Like, who cares about continuity issues? Like the last few films didn't care about continuity issues. So he was like, yep, just forget about it. And I'll tell you why he said that, like in the spoiler section. So like I said, I saw this movie with my dad. My dad gives this movie a 3.5 out of 4 stars. And for the first time this year, for this year in film, I give a movie 4 out of 4 stars. I just thought it was an incredible, top-notch film. So far, the best movie of the year, in my opinion. Just like one or two very, very, very nitpicky things. But yeah, if you haven't seen X-Men Days of Future Past, if you're a fan of the X-Men comics, then I think you'll really like it. If you're a fan of the X-Men films, you'll really like it. If you're a fan of superhero movies, you'll really like it. If you're a fan of action movies, I think you'll really like it. If you're a new initiated person in superhero movies, especially with the X-Men franchise, and you haven't seen any of the X-Men movies, I think you should get caught up with the other X-Men movies before seeing this, because you'll be confused at some parts of the movie if you haven't seen some of the other X-Men movies. Alright, spoilers for X-Men Days of Future Past. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then get out of here now. Unless you like spoilers, which I would find a little bit weird because who would want a film be spoiled to them? But anyways, if you haven't seen X-Men Days of Future Past, I beseech you to get out of here now because I want you to go in here with no knowledge of what happens because this movie is just awesome. One of the things I liked about the writing, and I didn't want to say this in the good points because it would have spoiled something about the movie, and the thing that I didn't want to spoil was that like the timeline has changed now. The events that happened in the first X-Men, X-Men 2, X-Men 3, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and the Wolverine movie, like those events never happened, so those 5 films are sort of like, yep, those things never happened. So really the timeline that we have now in this universe is with X-Men First Class and with X-Men Days of Future Past. I was a little bit surprised that they started out with a battle sequence, and when the battle sequence was happening, when some of the X-Men were dying, I was like, wait a second, what's going on? Because I see those people living in like other scenes, because I saw like the other scenes that those people were in like the trailer, so it's like, what's going on here? And then when the Sentinels like are getting that vault where Kitty Pryde and Bishop are, and Kitty Pryde's like too late, and then they disappear. It's like, whoa, what just happened? And they don't tell us like what happens like for a minute. It's like, oh, come on, please tell us what happened, and don't let that be like something that you don't say until like later on. And they tell us that Kitty Pryde can send people's consciousness back in time to their younger self, and like warn like what's gonna happen. I was like, oh, well, that's cool. But then the thing I was confused about, and this is one of the very, 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 very nitpicky things, which is that, wait, didn't Kitty Pryde just have the power to move through objects? But I guess Bryan Singer, again, was like, who cares about continuity, because we're starting this whole thing, this whole franchise over, sort of. Another thing I want to talk about was with Quicksilver, because he was an amazing character in this movie. And the best moment of this movie, like the best scene, was with Quicksilver, and it was when he was breaking Magneto out of the Pentagon, and he was in the Pentagon kitchen with the security guards, which fired their guns. So he starts to go in super speed, and he starts to rearrange the bullets, like their trajectory, and rearrange people's arms to make them like cross themselves and like hit each other, or like punch themselves in the face, or he like pokes one of the guards and it makes this like big ripple, and you could tell that like just that small poke was going to be like this really big punch to that security guard when it went back to like normal speed. And when everything was set in place by Quicksilver, he went back to normal speed, and you saw like the dominoes fall. You saw like the guards that were crossed armed like hit each other, the guy who punched, and the guy that got poked, like, ugh. Let's talk about the ending of this movie now, because when Wolverine was being like raised up out of the river by the police, and you saw Stryker there, I was like, oh, well, it seems like Wolverine still gets his adamantium claws then, and the police are like, oh, Major Stryker, what do you want to do? And Stryker looks away, and he's like, I'll take care of him. And then you see Mystique's eyes, and it's like, wait, what? It's Mystique? So it's like questions start forming in your head, in your like mind. It's like, wait, so did Mystique go on and give Wolverine his like adamantium claws? Does he still have his bone claws? Because we see in like after history was changed, we saw like a different future in the end where everybody was alive, including Cyclops and Jean. But the only thing we didn't see from Wolverine in the new future was like if he had bone claws or adamantium claws. So it sort of starts to get your mind thinking and gets you more excited to see like what's going to happen, because we have no idea what's going to happen because this is a new timeline. So that was my review for X-Men Days of Future Past. Hope you guys liked it, and other than that, that's it.